Well, the other big story today, Prime Minister Modi is on his way to Wuhan in China for an informal summit meeting with President Xi Jinping of China, which will take place tomorrow and day after. From what we understand, there is quite an interesting itinerary that's been planned, including a boat ride and walks by the lake. This is the first of its kind informal summit that certainly Mr. Modi is attending, and the first that President Xi is hosting in China, though he's done something similar with President Obama in the past and President Trump in the US. An informal summit basically means there is really no structured protocol. There are not going to be any aides, note takers and officials sitting in on these meetings. Only the interpreters and the two leaders will be in the room tomorrow, as I said, all day and for part of Saturday. My colleague Vishnu Shom sent us this report from Wuhan. He's reporting from there, and we asked him about what that schedule looks like.
Well, some details are now emerging about what the Prime Minister will be doing tomorrow in a series of meetings with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Remember, the Prime Minister arrives at about midnight over here in Wuhan, and he gets underway tomorrow in terms of his meetings in what is being described as an informal summit after about 3 p.m. tomorrow. The first meeting will be at the Hubei Provincial Museum. Wuhan is the capital of the province of Hubei. It's a special exhibition where President Xi would actually greet the Prime Minister. They would have their first round of one-on-one meetings over there. And after they travel to get a tour of this museum, they would then move to 1+6 talks. In other words, there would be 6 delegates who are part of the talks with each leader. And that would actually take place on 2 occasions tomorrow, and it would be followed by dinner, which is hosted by President Xi Jinping. Day after tomorrow, and these meetings, in fact, dinner would be hosted at a guest house, the East Lake Guest House. In fact, that's a short distance away from where I am now. Now, day after tomorrow is when the two leaders I should say, in fact, Saturday is when the two leaders meet more on a one-on-one basis. There would be a walk on the banks of the lake. There would be a boat ride as well, which is planned. And there would be no other delegates with the two leaders. They would only be accompanied by interpreters. Again, the Chinese president would be hosting lunch before Prime Minister Modi concludes this informal summit. Again, there is no fixed agenda over here. There is an expectation that issues which are important from a macro standpoint will be discussed. No expectations per se, but just a sense that India and China need to work together to write an equation which has been difficult.
Well, Vishnu Shom reporting there from Wuhan. Well, to talk us through that big story tonight, 2 former ambassadors, Ambassador K.C. Singh, Ambassador Meera Shankar, and Jayadev Ranade, who's an old China hand and president for the Center for China Analysis and Strategy. Ambassador Meera Shankar, let me ask you first. So this is a sort of unusual setting, an informal summit. Why do you think that this has happened at this particular time?
Well, I think, first of all, China feels itself under pressure from the United States, where trade friction between the two has actually now led to the announcement of punitive tariffs, which could be imposed if the talks between the US and China don't yield results. And the competition is really one for who is going to have mastery over the frontier technologies which are now going to be popularized, such as electric cars, robots, artificial intelligence, and in many of these areas, the renewable energy, in many of these areas, the Chinese have actually stolen a march on the Americans. So I don't think it's going to be something which will be very easy to handle. And in such a scenario, I think India also is facing protectionist pressure from the United States. So I think that there is a kind of a sense that India and China, being 2 large countries, developing countries with somewhat similar approaches to global trade or other global issues, could come together, and that would strengthen their hands in dealing with a protectionist US or even say protectionist Europe or whatever, because you're seeing actually protectionism emerge all over the world.
So it's interesting, you see it more from the Chinese prism, and I think Ambassador K.C. Singh, you've talked about that as well in a piece you've written today. But let me ask you, when you're kind of devoid of the formalities and the pressure of having a joint statement and having agreements out there, is that actually a good way to do diplomacy? Do you think that actually would work better, where they're able to have a more freewheeling conversation, or is it a risk?
Look, the Chinese look at things in a historical, in a much larger context, and that's why Global Times, which generally is used by China to play the bad cop against someone. As you recall, when Doklam was there, it wrote so many negative pieces. Last three pieces are very interesting in Global Times. They are talking of the 1988 moment when Rajiv Gandhi met Deng Xiaoping, which opened really the modern era of post-62 Indo-China relations, and we've gone up after that. Now, it may not be 1988, but it's also talking of a change in China, which is very interesting. And also they are saying Indian intellectuals have changed. I don't know where they've got that impression, but probably it's the RSS or BJP guys who have been going there and talking to them. So obviously this meeting was in the making for some time. Specifically since the visit of Foreign Secretary in February, he comes back, writes a letter to Cabinet Secretary that we will have low-key participation or none at all in the 60th anniversary of the arrival of Dalai Lama. So steps were beginning to be taken from there. No such summit can take place unless both sides are ready. New York Times comes up with a very interesting twist.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, which is that even for Prime Minister Modi, in the pre-election year, China can really be a spoiler, because were they to escalate the situation in any part of the border or create a confrontation somewhere which will not be seen as an Indian win, it can create a major domestic political problem.
Yeah, that New York Times piece is interesting. And Mr. Anade, let me ask you about that. Essentially what the New York Times is saying is that their understanding is that Mr. Modi is going there to kind of basically tell the Chinese that, look, I have an election year, back off, let's not have any sort of problems along the border. Do you think it's primarily that that has driven this, or essentially interests on both sides?
Well, first, just a very quick response to what you asked. Would the Chinese buy such a request? I mean, can we trust them to fulfill it? That's the first, the initial response of mine.
You work there, do you trust them?
I don't. That's why I asked you that question. But let me put it like this, that I think our relations have been on a downward spiral. Certainly since April 2015 with the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. After that, various other things have happened, the latest being Doklam. And the thinking here would have been that let us try and cool temperatures down, let us try and put the relations back on an even keel. And that's how feelers were sent out. As far as the Chinese are concerned, also things have been changing. While Xi Jinping has emerged much stronger, but there are 2-3 things that are beginning to bother them, that are bothering them. One, the relationship with the United States. While they expected that it would be turbulent, it has suddenly taken a turn for the worse, so they are worried. Second, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a flagship project of Xi Jinping, is running into rough weather. A lot of people are questioning it. And third, as far as they're concerned, they feel that India has now acquired a certain stature, if I may put it like that, of a spoiler. So you have well-known international affairs analysts in China saying that, look, we have to recalibrate our relations with India before our ambitious programs are thrown.
So you think it's temporary?
So I think it's both who are looking to try and, if I may say, just cool temperatures down for the moment. So I think that is what the main objective of this meeting would be. What New York Times says that, Prime Minister Modi wants to buy time, or at least wants to say don't do anything till 2019. It requires a high degree of trust that if you tell the Chinese that they're going to comply with that. Yeah. So I think that certainly would be his agenda.
But wouldn't there be, Ambassador Meera Shankar, if you actually want to show that, the tide is turning in the relationship and all these positive vibes are for real. Now, we don't expect China to obviously change its relationship vis-a-vis Pakistan. But it would require some kind of a gesture from the Chinese side to indicate its seriousness, whether it is on Masood Azhar or the NSG membership, something to say that, look, we are serious about this. Do you see any of that happening in the course of the next 6 months, 8 months?
Well, I haven't seen any sign of it as yet. What we have seen is a Chinese willingness to look at restoring, military exchanges, exercises, perhaps resuming data sharing on the Brahmaputra, which in any case is very meager. They don't really give you substantive data on the projects that they are doing. So it's more like things which are not of core concern to India. And on many other issues like the Pakistan-China economic corridor, or the NSG membership, or even Masood Azhar, we have no signal as yet that there is any change in the Chinese position. So I think we have gone out of our way to signal that we are taking China's concerns into account on a core issue like Tibet and the Dalai Lama. So I suppose we should really expect something reciprocal from China, and that would be an earnest of their good intentions. I mean, if they don't do it, then where's the substance?
It can't even be Nirav Modi now, because apparently he's gone off to New York. So that's off the table. But Ambassador saying, in that case, what is the best then? What can you expect as an outcome? The government has played down expectations in terms of outcomes agreements, obviously, but people will look to see, okay, what has been the end result of this? If it's going to be some banal statement about constructive and overarching discussions.
No, there's no joint statement.
Yeah, so
they don't want a statement.
Yeah.
I think what's happening is they are really trying to see if there can be a strategic readjustment between the two countries, which means China has to do a few things, which will happen over a period of time, cut India's slack. Not raise the temper, not push up other people in Indian periphery. India needs more space in its periphery. If relationship is seen improving with China, many of these countries, many of our relationships with these countries, Maldives, Nepal, Sri Lanka, they'll immediately fall into a different slot because those countries start reading the signals that now you cannot play China against India, so let's deal with each separately to the extent possible. So it has to be a strategic. It's actually a 2005 moment. What happened in 2005 was when their Prime Minister came, that's when the agreement was signed on principles to settle the border. And the Chinese, after 2008, slipped from that. In the SR's meetings, there was no progress. They started pushing us in different places. Are we going back to that? We will know when the SR's meeting takes place, whether border problem starts getting resolved. Other things will just follow, BRI, etc. will follow, because that has Pakistan in it, Indo-Pak relations in it. Yeah. And China has become a very important factor in handling Pakistan.
In fact, the Prime Minister just arrived in Wuhan. Just wanted to make a reference to that. Those are live pictures there.
Incidentally, Wuhan is where Mao went for his famous swim. Yeah. And then he kicked off the Cultural Revolution. So the Chinese are very conscious of historical context, of historical references, and that's why he's chosen it.
So in that context, then was it smart to sort of cave in on the Tibet issue and say, tell officials stay away from the Dalai Lama's events and do all of that, and also inform the Chinese in advance that, look, we're doing this? Was that smart, or will that come back to bite us at some point?
Look, when you are readjusting, I'm sure the Chinese have given certain assurances on something else, but this is the least they would have wanted to start with. Yes, there may be a problem in terms of optics, explaining as you go ahead and you do some more things, and if Chinese immediately don't start responding with visible steps. But I have a feeling once the strategic, this is what they did with US. Once Nixon went there and Kissinger had done the work in '72, they said, okay, we will put Taiwan away. So Chinese have a way of readjusting strategically, and that is what needs to be judged. Not nitty-gritty, whether they've done BRI or this, Masood Azhar. Those are things that Chinese have kept on the table to press with, to bargain with.
Those are important because those are
the issues. They will do all that.
Which are important in your perception battle domestically.
So if the strategic readjustment is there, they will all fall into place. If it is not there, it can go awry.
Will that strategic readjustment
Well,
take place,
firstly,
you
I
think?
think it's...
because you have a fundamental mistrust of the Chinese regime.
I think it's a misjudgment, if I may say, to put us on the same footing as the United States, as far as the Chinese are concerned. They do not treat us the way they treat the United States. The kind of attention that they pay to the US is quite different. So I don't think that kind of adjustment is going to happen. Secondly, as far as the Chinese are concerned, there has been no signaling at all in the Chinese media. There has been no lessening of criticism. There's been no indication that they are going to change their posture towards us. I'm talking about towards India, except for 2 articles in the Global Times that he referred to. One was, in fact, I would say almost gushing. I think that's the one Casey was referring to just now, which itself is a bit odd. But
because it was a complete U-turn from a few months
and
ago.
And mind you, there have been other articles in Global Times which have been critical in the same period. This other thing is on Pakistan and Maldives. On Pakistan, there have been 2 comments by the Chinese just in the last 3 or 4 days. One was on terrorism, where in fact they came out to bat for Pakistan and said everyone else must come. Yeah, exactly. So there is no change there. And second was the assurance given by the Chinese to the Pakistan Navy chief when he was visiting, saying that we will provide protection and security for the CPEC. So that is almost, you know, like guaranteeing security. That's the word used, in fact, for the CPEC.
And similarly,
as far as
Foreign
Maldives are concerned, again, there has been a very clear statement by them that they will protect Maldives' interests. So I think when we are looking at this, I would look at it as a very limited objective kind of initial, meeting, which hopefully would lead to better things. But I'd look for 2 things straight away. One is a lowering of temperatures around Doklam. If that starts happening, I think it's a good sign. The second is a change in the tone of their propaganda. The rest, as the others have said, hopefully will follow, but I think much more would be required.
I think the key question would be to assess whether the Chinese move is tactical, in the sense that you feel yourself under pressure, so you don't want to be pressured on all fronts. Their main preoccupation right now is with the US, then with Korea, and then Taiwan, so their immediate neighborhood, and then, you know, with Japan. So their preoccupation is elsewhere. They don't want another preoccupation with India. So you'll have to assess whether there is a strategic intent, that is an intent,
a tactical one.
Yeah, or a tactical one, and that I think it's too early to say right now. You would have to wait and watch what the outcome is as it unfolds over a period of time.
Just one quick point. What has not been noticed, I was reading up, just picked up. On 28th, there's a meeting to decide to speed up what is being called the RCEP. It's what the Chinese are really interested in, which is the 10 ASEAN countries, China, Republic Korea, Japan, India, Australia, and New Zealand, regional cooperation, comprehensive economic partnership. Chinese are very keen on that. They would want India fully committed because they are worried about US flip-flopping on TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. So there is also this economic linkages which are developing, economic groups which are developing. They would like to, at the very least, neutralize India so that it's not seen as moving into the US or the Japanese corner, and to that extent see how much adjustment they have to do, what adjustment they have to do vis-a-vis Pakistan or other things, to see that India remains neutral, which is good for India because India has to play a balancing game.
Well, as it was I think very interestingly put by Ambassador Meera Shankar, is it tactical or strategic? Yeah. We will have to see how that plays out. And let's just cut full frame to the shots for a moment. Just to remind our viewers, these are live pictures coming in from Wuhan. The Prime Minister's just arrived there. It is about after midnight now. It's nearly 12:30 in the morning. It's about 12:25 in the morning, and they begin their day, I think, around 10 o'clock tomorrow local time. It's very unclear at the moment what kind of media access there will be. We are told that there will be some access to pictures and photo ops, because obviously there will. But don't expect any media statements, joint statements, and the pomp and ceremony that normally accompanies summit level meetings. And just to make an interesting point here, Ambassador Casey Singh, on this whole idea of an informal summit, how do you think the Chinese have taken to that? Because President Xi is not known to, for instance, like golf. So when he went to Mar-a-Lago, that became an issue. How do you think they take to this idea of an informal summit?
I was talking to somebody in South Block.
Because there's so this thing about protocol.
They said Chinese don't generally like informal summits because they like a piece of paper. They like to operate on the basis of a structured piece of paper based meeting. But he did the same thing at Mar-a-Lago with Trump. So they said Xi Jinping is much more confident, quite unlike other Chinese presidents in the past, where he's willing to bat on his own and without a paper, sit down and talk informally without an agenda, and therefore you can put whatever you want on the table. So it's a sign of confidence. Very confident leader.
Will be interesting
and
to see
Prime
how much
Minister
time.
In any case, is very comfortable operating.
In informal settings, he's mastered that's for sure. I have to leave it there today. We will be revisiting this story tomorrow, and I would like to thank our guests who are wonderfully coordinated as well tonight. Complete coincidence. So thank you to all of you. See you again tomorrow. Good night.